Welcome to Connecting the Dots, first podcast on race and equity in early childhood education. I'm Pat, and I'll be joined by two of my colleagues in just a moment. And we will be inviting you into this first of what we hope will be many roundtable discussions on this important topic. We thought this image of a teacher's lounge was suiting as we set the table for this initial get together with all of you. We know it's kind of idyllic, but we do hope there's some place that you gather and that maybe these conversations can find a place and a way into your own practice. Our focus today will be on the importance of bringing the whole person to the conversation, making time and space for each person's own personal history to be shared before unpacking some of the more difficult aspects of personal prejudices and biases that we all carry. My guests and I are fortunate to have worked together as early childhood coaches in many different contexts and settings in the 5 boroughs of New York City for the past 6 years. So we've established a sense of trust, a key component when engaging in courageous conversations on race and equity. We want to thank you for joining us, and let's get started. Shannon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Hi, my name is Shannon Vasquez, and as Pat mentioned, I've spent about 6 years working with these lovely ladies, and we have been fortunate enough to have lots of conversations in real life and lots of conversations where we could be together. And sometimes that was around, what we had for dinner or what we were working on the weekend. And sometimes it was about race and education, and primarily our conversations around race worked to help us to look at our own racial identities and think about how that impacts the work that we did with teachers and children and school leaders. And also, I think to have an ear and an eye to look for the things that were happening in schools that were impacted by race. So it is my pleasure to be here. I know that this is the first of many table-side conversations, and we're going to hear from Allison now.
I wanted to interject one thing because Shannon, as coaches, which is what we all were together, and we worked in so many different contexts across all 5 boroughs in different early childhood settings. But not only were we coaching, we were also having a lot of professional development to be prepared for that coaching work. And Shannon, you were our leader in the work we were doing around conversations about race, courageous conversations about race, Singleton's book. So I just wanted to throw that in. That's why these conversations between the 3 of us have been taking place in a very kind of framed way, as well as in just off the cuff, comfortable other settings. But that was definitely a part of our work and was anchored by you. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was work I was so happy and proud to do with you.
Yeah. So I'm up. My name is Allison. I have found the last 6 years that I've been in this community with people like Pat and Shannon to be some of the best in terms of my development as an educator. I come to education in America, leaving my country in the Caribbean because I wanted more in terms of being able to service and help and train and guide children all over the world, children in general. I always found all children are the same. So it was very confusing being an immigrant, a new person in America, and trying to navigate the system. And I was left with a lot of questions and nobody to really answer me. Fitting into the minority community, which was a first for me, coming from being a majority in a country to come to a place as a minority, it became very confusing and overwhelming. And I felt I wasn't grounded until I became a part of this little community here. So just being able to be amongst these minds, have the conversations as they continue, I found have been invaluable for me as an educator, and also in terms of doing hands-on work. That was my personal development. But in terms of doing hands-on work, we found ourselves in a very interesting environment right now. There's so much going on. And it, in some ways, is like what we were doing for those past 6 years is like a small piece of what it was. We were coaches going to schools, we all over the place, different types of environments, different types of the landscapes. You just never knew what you were going to get,
Yes.
whether it was resources, whether it was background, whether it was culture, whether it was experiences, or just some sort of trauma, either individuals or the community as a whole, and of course, teacher preparation, teacher training. So in many ways, going through that with this group at this time and being able to discuss these topics is invaluable. And thank you, Pat, for opening up this framework and this stage to more or less have us not only continue it, but almost expand it and open it up to so many others.
Well, it's absolutely, my privilege, and also something that we had started that felt like it was never going to stop. And then all of a sudden COVID happened, and we see even more of a need for it. So I think there was no stepping away, no matter whether our framed existence that we had gotten used to, which, by the way, we were working as coaches for Bank Street College and had a great privilege to do so, I feel. But that being said, it stopped. When COVID happened, all of the work that we had been engaged in stopped. And for us, it was just, that combined with all of the other things, but losing access to the young children and to those teachers that we had cultivated relationship with and had started to have some of these, gingerly started to tap into some of these types of questions, and it all just went away. And then we saw teachers having to teach from home and recreate their own teaching styles, sometimes with supports and sometimes with not as much support. And so for us, I think this connecting the dots, I know, is a way for us to respond. So I hope that we can continue that, but this is one piece of it. And I was thinking that tonight, it would be interesting, since we hope this to be a series of conversations, if in tonight's episode, we just talk about our own upbringing, our own cultural identity. And, we come from very different places, all three of us, and perhaps thinking about what your own early childhood education or earliest memory was about race, or if you'd like to share that, or perhaps you might feel more comfortable sharing some memories that you had about what type of educational approach you were first invited into as a young child. What was that like? Because I know we are all three progressive educators, but I don't think any of us had that opportunity when we were young. So I would like us to kind of ground some of our work more around who we are as individuals, so that this conversation can then continue to grow into all these other areas once our listeners and once we, because this is something we haven't shared with each other as much, have that understanding of the differences of what we experienced in early childhood. So I would ask perhaps, Shannon, would you like to start a little bit about the background of where you grew up and what was your education like?
Sure. So I grew up as early childhood would have been in the 80s. It would have been mid 80s, I would say. And I did not go to pre-K or nursery. We went to kindergarten. I say we because I'm a twin, so I speak in we a lot. And I would say it probably was a traditional setting, but it was very much what kindergarten has, I think, lost in recent years. So I remember music, and I remember dramatic play, and I remember puppets and nap time, and some time spent outdoors. So, and this was in Flushing, Queens. And I would say that the classroom, so this is kindergarten, I would say that the class was a public school, and I would say diverse. I would say racially and ethnically diverse. The teachers in the school were predominantly white, for sure. I'm trying to I can picture my kindergarten class picture and see all those little kids. The class was at least half white, at least half. And then the community was very, I would say, middle working class community.
Was your teacher white? Was your
My teacher was black. My teacher was black. Her name was Miss English. She had braids. I remember that. She was a small woman. I loved her dearly. I remember, if I could see images, I see like lots of dresses. I think probably I wore dresses to school a lot, or at least I wanted to. Maybe that's what it was. There's one story that my mother always told us, and that was that the teachers would tell her that we were in separate classrooms. So this was twins separated for the first time, and our classrooms faced each other. So we just had the hallway. And during rest time, we would rest, each one of us would rest in the doorway so we could see each other. And I don't know if that came about because we were crying or upset, or had teachers that were incredibly thoughtful and feeling and able to make responsive decisions. I don't know how that came about, but that's such an adorable, I think, story.
Did you have, by any chance, any understanding or any moments that stood out in your memory of being connected to any racial divide in the class, or cultural dissonance, or any racial, not even racial, cultural celebrations, any of those things that were present in the classroom?
I don't have any strong recollection of any of that. I will say that, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, that was the era of diversity equaling melting pot messaging. So that when if we had like oh gosh, what did they call that? Culture Day or ethnic, I don't honestly remember what it was called, but it's that sort of typical, very narrow-minded approach where everybody bring in a dish that they make in your family, or that people like you may eat, and bring that dish in, and we're gonna have one day where we celebrate. Oh, Multicultural Day. Yeah, that's what it was called.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Multicultural Day. And I think, sure, those experiences were fun. I remember looking forward to them. I don't remember that any sort of approach seeping into the rest of the curriculum. I don't remember thinking or talking about culture in any other way, honestly.
Now, and let me ask you too, Shannon. So I know that your last name is Vasquez, and I know that your parents, their heritage is from Puerto Rico, both of your parents, but your father, if I'm not mistaken, was a first generation American. So he was actually born here in the United States, or was he born in Puerto Rico?
Both of my parents were born here.
Oh,
and so born New Yorkers, so New Yorkers.
Okay.
And their parents were born in Puerto Rico. And so they grew up, I would say Spanish would have been their first language, but English would have been pushed and probably replaced Spanish very quickly upon entering school.
And so you did not learn Spanish, or you did learn Spanish?
Spanish was the language that well, my grandparents spoke Spanish, of course, but my parents would speak it with each other if they wanted to say something that we weren't meant to hear. And so that was a way for them to communicate beyond our understanding. I think I have always had an ear for the Spanish language. And so I picked it up much quicker than my sisters and understood it a lot more, and then went on to study it a little bit in school. And so people would consider me bilingual, though I'm very rusty right now in speaking Spanish, because I don't use it in any regular way. Language, you hear a lot about, use it or lose it. Language is one of those things where it just takes daily usage to really hold on to it, or regular, if not daily, regular usage. So yeah, but I mean, my own identity, I think at that time as well, that in the 80s, I was and would have been referred to as Spanish, like, oh, you're Spanish, those people are Spanish. Which I didn't understand what it really meant until much, much later, probably well into adulthood. So when people call me or refer to me or someone else like me as Spanish, I do correct them, because, well, I'm not from Spain. My family's not from Spain either. There's a difference between being, whether you use the word Latin or still use Hispanic, but Spanish needs to go out the window unless you're speaking about, a Spaniard from Europe.
I think that's important. I think people are still learning that. So thank you for giving us that lesson and that framing. And you may have to remind me occasionally, because I do think that, we don't grow up in the Latinx. Is that how we're saying it? I don't even.
A lot of people use Latinx, so there's no gender.
It's still confusing to a lot of people. And and I'd love to talk further about that when we can in one of our next podcasts. I'm thinking we should move on so that we get all of our identities firmly established for our next conversation, because we can talk for hours, and we often do. So listeners, I hope you're still with us. We're gonna thank you so much for that, Shannon, because that was
you're welcome.
That was really I felt like I went into the classroom with you. So thank you for taking the time to really let us journey with you back into those memories, because memories are what are defining our present. I mean, our past is always a part of our present, and hopefully we can change some of our future thinking, but not without acknowledging all those pieces, right? And so doing that tonight is important. Allison, can you tell us about your childhood?
Oh, my childhood. I loved it. It was wonderful. It's interesting that so much of it is, as a child, it just appears normal to you. It was like my norm. And as I get older and as I start answering questions like this, I realize how maybe not so normal it was. I now can say that I did actually, my early child experience was actually in very many ways progressive, surprisingly. And I think I'm one of the original 3Kers. Yes, I was a 3K. There's a story behind that, which I will tell you. So what it was, there was in the Caribbean, because of course it was started off initially as a slave economy. A lot of the schools that were started there were started by the missionaries and a lot of specific people who were motivated to educate and things like that. Often, so my parents were fortunate enough to have gone to one of these colleges set up for women who were always left behind and ignored. And they in turn set up a junior school. So it was we call it junior and secondary. So it would have been from, let's see, I guess middle and upper school are lumped together, and junior school, which would be elementary school. So the high school, middle, upper, started their own junior school. What happened in my country around the time of nation building, so that would be 70s, some 80s, is that the government decided to take over the education. So they started with these well-established schools. So a lot of these schools with their good track record were what we call government assisted. The closest, but not so close to be like a charter school, so that they get a lot of funding from the government, but they're open to everyone, right? And so that was public. That school that I went to had a junior school associated with it, which is where I went. That was private. My parents paid to put me in there. So it was what we called Anglican, which is Episcopalian schools. So we had a lot of the teachers and stuff would come from places like England, Australia, and things like that. So all my time there, the principal was a lady from England, and we had some phenomenal teachers from Australia and a couple from other, Ireland, Scotland, and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But amongst that, we did have a core of Caribbean students, Caribbean teachers. So it was a very mixed pot as far
Right.
as teachers. Um, why I was the 3K person, we did have a kindergarten, and I have a sister who's 2 years older than me. And apparently every day for the first year she cried because I was having more fun at home. And every day for 3 years I cried at home because she was having more fun at school. So the frustrated parent, my own, and the frustrated teacher, my sisters and the whole school, because my aunt was teaching there. So every day it was watching my sister run away from kindergarten trying to get a hug from my aunt, who taught like third or fourth grade. And then they decided once I can get toilet trained, I can go to school. And I wasn't the only one. I have a group of, at least I would say, 15 to 20 of us that started school at 3 years old. So it was like, it was like a mixed age group. It turned out to be threes and fours. But a good chunk of us were 3-year-olds and a good chunk of us were 4-year-olds. So that was it. It was an amazing thing. It was on top of a hill. There was a river running around it. We had a lot of experiences walking down to the river, fishing, bringing up natural stuff to work on in the classroom. The teacher, I guess, they remind me of like the typical old school teacher where you had to play an instrument to be a kindergarten teacher. So music was there all around. And just the things that would insert into the curriculum. I mean, I remember we had a trampoline, so a huge trampoline, Olympic size trampoline. This would have been in the late 70s, early 80s. So it was a matter of not what you would find at typical school. Trinidad at the time, they were opening up the little, what we call government primary schools, and it would have been the 3 hours reading, writing, arithmetic, a big schoolroom. You hear the lessons going on, a very sort of directive kind of learning,
Right.
instead of that much experiential hands-on. So yeah, the school I went to was very hands-on, artsy.
Diverse. It sounds like it was quite diverse.
Right. And it was very diverse. We had, so it would have definitely catered to more upper class because of the fact that it did charge school fees. It wasn't that expensive. So I would say upper middle class. There's a big chunk of middle class, upper middle class. And then we had a lot of children of dignitaries, and as well as a lot of clergy's children. So we had, I remember one of my friends was the son of, was it Japan or Tokyo? One of those kids, so we had a lot of people in there from diverse cultures. Remember, there was African girl came down there, 3 of them, so throughout the time, people would just come and say, oh, look, we have someone new. So it would be where they would send diplomats and clergy and stuff.
And I'm curious what kind of role the local culture in such a diverse setting played. In other words, how honored was your culture in that academic setting? And was it the predominant culture? And did it have that place?
So it's really interesting being an immigrant to America and getting caught up in all the talk about race and culture. That doesn't say that it wasn't a fact in Trinidad, but it was, I think, very commonplace when I was growing up. I think a lot of it is we took it for granted, and a lot of times we sort of ignored discussing it. So that's not to say it was right, but that's just how it was. Trinidad is naturally, or it was pretty much a very equable racial climate for the most part. It was pretty much more or less, say, 40% East Indian, 40% African descendants. And then you had maybe, when I was growing up there, maybe like less than 10% European,
Okay.
and then the rest was mixed. Okay, really mixed. And even that was more like predominantly African American, predominantly Indian, um, and things like that. So you had, and in terms of culture, you had three major religions, Christian based, Hindu, and Muslims. Um, and even so, the Muslims were also very diverse. We had Muslims that were basically Indian and Muslims North African. So
Wow.
very different in it.
Wow.
But yeah, yeah. So in many ways, diversity was almost like a way of life for us. But I find like it was taken for granted a lot, you know? So it's like, you know, when you expect it, it's nothing that you really, sometimes you do not see the value of it. You may just sort of disregard it, or it's not something you hold on to, like I hold on to my little artifacts here. But that is how it was when I was growing up.
Well, it sounds like opportunity was somewhat equalized amongst the races, the different multicultural people who were making up your country.
Yes.
Opportunity, there was enough sufficient opportunity for everyone to feel that they had a place.
They were definitely trying. It was, and again, we got our independence in the 60s. So at the time when I was growing up, the focus was really on nation building. How do we define our own destiny? How do we carve it out? So maybe it was more unintentional for me because I was like, at that age, I was just sort of going with the flow and it was my normal. Like when I have conversations with my 17-year-old daughter, she was pretty much grew up, and even my son who's 12, in a time when there was a black president. You know, that's their first reality. So it's a matter of, for them, not they weren't aware of it, or not they are not shocked by some things that are happening, but for them, their normal starts with, but we have a black president and a black first lady, you know. So it's a matter of, I feel that was something of what I was going through. I was born into this state where a lot of the issues about who is being seen in the front line of the bank, how light you are, you can have a bank job. If you're dark, you go in the back to do the accounting. That was already ironed off for most parts. So
when you say, can I just interrupt for 1 second and say, when you say that was already ironed off, does that mean that that was already, agreements had been made and acceptances had been established about the order? And so there wasn't a lot of conflict about that?
I think it was a matter of the new government, as in government for the people made up of only Trinidadians, were pretty much told that they had to be sort of account for those sort of attitudes. So it was an issue of the mirror turning inwards. And there were a lot of discussions about, but this is not right. We're still sort of perpetuating things by the colonizers. Is that who we want to be? How do we define that? So it's not that it was non-existent, but a lot of that big fervor from it, we had what we call the Black Power riots in the 70s and stuff like that. You know, representation on TV, you know, so it was, you know, why we still only showing Caucasians that are minority. And, you know, so a lot of that had already been highlighted and was being sort of dealt with. At that time, I can't really say whether it was effective or not because I was a little kid, just happy to go up the mountain and look at the animals and stuff like that. But
yeah, you were, it was somewhat idyllic. And then
yes.
And you're giving us your viewpoint from when you were a young child, which is where we're going to kind of continue to stay. I know, Shannon, you might have a question about the independence that had been won by Trinidad from whom? Whom had they won their independence from exactly?
That's a trick question. Trinidad, and I'll just go, I've often cursed out in the Bronx because people think I'm Hispanic, and I do have that background, and I'm also cursed out by Haitians because I think like that, and I do have that background. Trinidad was initially a Spanish colony. They turned over reins very peacefully because we did not have a militia to the British when they came. Its location is right at the gateway for whole of South America. So at the time when everybody swore there was an El Dorado and they wanted to get all the gold and the jewels, we were strategic. So when England came with their big armada, they just sort of said, "Hi, welcome, come in." Um, so then we were British until the time of independence in the 60s. However, we did have a big influx of French at the time of the French Revolution, um, where anybody who would claim loyalty to the throne, to a king, was given land. So we had a large influx of the French. And then when around the time of emancipation of the slaves and we could not get laborers, the British pulled everybody from all their colonies. So we had an influx of, I think we call them Syrians, a lot of Lebanese and stuff like that, and other Persians. And we also had a bit influx of Southeast Asians and Portuguese that didn't really work out too well. Just wherever England can pull people to try and Chinese to try and replace the labor that said we're not working. I hear we're free, we're gone, out of here. That's what they did.
Well, that was an important history lesson of which I need to learn even more. As your friend, I want to learn more about that. But I wanted to let you know that what I've always had as a takeaway from any of the conversations, and even this one tonight, is that you're very proud of your culture. You're very proud of where you come from. And I never hear anything other than that. I feel like you feel like as if you were a part of a great experiment and you liked the way it was going when you were living in Trinidad. Am I right? Is that
yes? I'm interested you pick up on that. And when I sit, because a lot of times I'm asked to reflect on things like that now, as I was saying, and I think a good deal of it is the whole issue of how you treat people, the respect. So in terms of the what's the word, the not viability, but as a people, as a culture, as a group, as a whichever one it is, as a race, as a sex, as a race, I felt at each stage we were respected, whether it, like I said, whether it was gender. And unfortunately, it was a very two-part gender system growing up in the Caribbean, unfortunately. There was respect, or at least trying to gain respect
right
for females. So it's a matter of ensuring that whoever I can identify with, whether it's Black, whether it's Caribbean, whether it's female, whether it is mixed, there is a part of that, sort of that. I found there was always an issue of respect and not trying to belittle or demean any culture, any part of that.
No, and I think in future conversations, it'll be interesting because Allison, if I may share, you married someone who is not from that same background and has had a very different racial experience in this country. And you're raising young children, or now middle-aged children, mid-tweens.
Yes.
And I think, in these conversations that we're going to continue to have, I think how we continue to look at unpacking some of the different lenses that we're all looking through when having these deeper conversations about race and equity, it will help us not only celebrate some of the positives that are happening, though they may be small and minor. I feel that you have some positive experiences and some of your history. And I'd love to think more about why that was, like what I think that's important for us to kind of unpack, but also that all of those experiences, as we said earlier, influence how we go about embracing or entering into these conversations in our work. So I think, I just appreciate both of your past backgrounds and how you've shared. And I'm going to share a little bit about mine, and then we should probably end tonight's roundtable because we have so many more things to talk about, but at least now our listeners who decide to rejoin us for future conversations will have some context about who we are and what we're bringing to these conversations. I'm going to say that my background, as my two friends here already know, was quite different. And I grew up in the time of segregation in the Deep South in Alabama, 30 minutes from Selma, Alabama. And so I experienced the delayed integration that happened in my small town. We were definitely a part of the holdout. You know, we didn't go easily into integrating. But speaking about my experiences as a white a person of privilege growing up in a small Southern town whose father was a district attorney and, you know, was in the law enforcement, we had a feeling of safety that I think I had no idea the number of people who didn't have that safety, that were 3/4 of the people who made up our town. So growing up with that kind of strange hypocrisy and, you know, the people who were raising me were always Black women who were incredible and loving and gave me the best foods that you could ever ask for and dance lessons and everything else. It was a beautiful experience until the understanding when I was 5 years old and went to sit down in get my donuts and hot chocolate with my dad before going to kindergarten. And there were no stools to sit on any longer because they had literally removed them. And asking my father, who I thought was the greatest man on earth, what had happened overnight that we could no longer sit and have our hot chocolate and donuts. And he just said, well, now Black people can sit down, so no one will sit. And that for me was like, wow, the world is a crazy place. Like I already had some feeling about maybe, but that was it for me. It was like, nothing makes sense now. And so that was my first real understanding of how strange the world that I was living in was organized. I can speak further about that, but I want to go back into the early childhood part of education part of my upbringing, which was there was no real education system for young children. Some woman in the town who was able would take all of the children. In my case, her name was Miss Hatcher, which I thought was quite funny. Hatching all the children, and her husband was the postmaster. And well, you know, it was mixed ages. We all came together, and there were only white children, of course, at that time. And we were allowed to reenact in our play outside. We were outside frequently. Basically the war, I think the war that was, had been before, because our parents had all been in wars. So we heard a lot about war, and this was in the 60s. So, you know, war was coming again. So that's really what we did. We were allowed to play outside, and we were soldiers and nurses, and, you know, that play kind of informed a lot of what we were hearing on television that nobody was really explaining to us. And we worked through those different roles to try and make sense of it. We never played about or talked about, of course, that racial separation that we were all experiencing. So it was a very strange time. And I have many more stories about all of that. But I will say that, you know, as we continue with these roundtable conversations, I think it's just fantastic that we all have such different experiences that we can bring to this and talk about the fact that one thing we all should remember is that all teachers are coming with all of these bags of different experiences. And when there's no place for them to unpack them or to have frank conversations about confusion that they may have about race or equity or how they're feeling about their own prejudices, then we don't move forward. So we're hopeful that this table that we are creating here can be that place for many of you. Make sure next time you get some snacks and some drinks, because we like to talk. But we hope to keep it interesting. We have many topics that are coming up that we'll be discussing. And I just want to thank, with my whole open heart, Shannon and Allison.
Mm-hmm.
And I just can't wait for the next one. So hopefully you can't either. and you will join us again. And until that time, we hope you have a safe, wonderful evening. And we leave you with this. Think about one special memory that you have from your own early childhood in education. And we would love, in the future, we'll be live streaming as well. So we would love for you to be thinking about that and thinking about why that memory stands out for you as we get you to come back together and be in touch with the child within. So thank you for tonight, and we will see you again. Thank you.
Bye.